Hello, welcome to Zoonosis with Joy. I'm Joy, and today we're going to be talking about the German Shepherd dog. This is a requested video, so I'm going to put their name up on the screen. We're going to talk about the breed, about their history, and about their common health conditions. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the section below. I hope you enjoy. So German Shepherd dogs are kind of a little bit of a problematic favorite of mine. And we'll talk about a little bit why in a few minutes here, but they are quite charismatic animals. They're very handsome in terms of physical aspects. They are very intelligent. They are also used for a wide variety of different contexts. So they are used as service animals for those with visual impairments. They are used in military policing aspects. They're used in search and rescue. And it's really this versatility that has led to their popularity down the years. They are, good at shepherding, tracking, guarding, all sorts of different jobs. And this has made them a very popular animal in terms of dog breeds. But their history does have a few questionable and problematic aspects, some things that we can't ignore, and this has led to them having health conditions down the line, and we'll talk a little bit about here going forward. So German Shepherd dogs and dog breeds in general, they really only start to show up as distinct breeds in the 19th century and the early 20th century. Now, keep in mind, in the 19th century, they didn't understand genetics at all. They didn't understand the principles of inheritance, and they certainly didn't understand molecular genetics, which wasn't discovered until long into the 20th century. So, you may think of like Gregor Mendel discovering the peas back in the 19th century. That stuff wasn't understood until the 20th century, and his work wasn't recognized for how important it was until much later. So, when we're understanding inheritance and genetics and breeding, we have to understand that these individuals were working off of a lot of assumptions and a lot of prejudices from their time, things that are pseudoscientific now, but weren't understood to be at the time. With that, a lot of this was informed by understandings of biological racism, or race science, the pseudoscientific understanding that people and animals could be understood as biological races that had distinct origins, and they were distinct groups that were genetically separable. This is not the case, but we need to understand a little bit about how they thought when we understand the origins of the German Shepherd dog. They understood that the physical characteristics could be passed down from the parents down to the offspring. And this, physical appearance is what mattered to them, because this is what they could see and measure. So they would take photos of the animals if they had photography, which they did by the end of the 20th century. They would measure their head, they would measure their legs, the proportions, they would look at the hair color, and they would find these ideal conformations, and they would use that as their breed conformation or their breed standard. The other aspect of this is that they also believed in biological purity, the understanding that distinct pure groups help limit the influx of new genetics, which could dilute the purity of a breed. And this, of course, was understood, by the basis of biological racism. These people believed that miscegenation caused physical defects and led to degeneration. Of course, they would hate people like me who have multiple different ethnicities and multiple different backgrounds, but there you go. These people were racist. They had very misguided ideas about biological race and biological inheritance. And that is the basis for dog breeding in the 19th century. Keep in mind that this was a profession, or this was a hobby of people who had time, that needed time to and money to actually breed these animals. So it was a hobby of the idle rich, of the bourgeoisie, and of the aristocracy. German Shepherd dogs, originally their stock was from the rural parts of Germany, as the name implies. They were often used as shepherding dogs, but they were kind of just farm dogs, really. They were distinguished, of course, from other dog breeds that came from Germany, such as the Doberman Pinscher or the Great Dane, but they weren't seen as anything distinct or remarkable until basically the end of the 19th century, the early 20th century. And the Society for the German Shepherd dog, which still exists today, it's called the SV, has a German name, which I can't pronounce, unfortunately, but it was really the first sort of dog breed for the German Shepherd, and it formed in 1901. One of the founders, the principal founder, was Max von Stepanitz. Now, Stepanitz was a Prussian cavalry officer and a member of the minor nobility. He, had a long career working for the Prussian military and, had a lot of those conservative German nationalist ideals, which would, of course, become the basis for German imperialism in World War I. And he was also a racist. So he believed in the biological supremacy of the German people. And this Volkish understanding of the German people led to the creation of the German Shepherd. So he wanted a dog that had the conformation that was similar to a wolf. And I mean wolf kind of in the general outlines. You can see here with the outline drawn over the skeleton and internal organs of this diagram here, that, you know, pointed ears, long muzzle, kind of this long legs, sleek back, this kind of brown to black to blonde coat. These were really traditional things that Germans associated with wolves. And the wolf is a very important symbol in German folklore and German ideology of German, you know, the folkloric understanding of German nationalism that was popular at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. Now, Max von Stepanitz and his, I should say colleagues, I guess, members of the society, they wanted to breed this dog that had this kind of Volkish quality because they wanted an ideal companion for the German so-called Aryan man. They, of course, German was a very sliding scale at this time. Of course, they didn't consider everyone to be a German, but they, you know, people differed on exactly who was a German, and this became the basis for German anti-Semitism. Now, importantly enough, Max von Stepanitz wasn't an anti-Semite. He didn't believe that the German Jews were anything different than the Germans themselves, and this made him a later pariah from the Nazi Party. Other members of the society felt differently about Jews, and that became a little bit of a bone of contention between them. But the German Shepherd was based on this German Volkish understanding, and it also had a lot of that patriarchal German militarism that was associated with it as well. So the German Shepherd was bred specifically to be, you know, used for policing and used for military functions. Very early on in society's creation, they were actually hosting police dog training sort of sessions, and they were promoting the use of the German Shepherd for German police. They also tried to market it to the German military, although that wasn't successful at first, and it took a few years for it to become popular enough to be used in the German military. Fortunately for the breeders, and unfortunately for the dogs and everyone else, World War I broke out, and the German military decided that they needed large amounts of dogs for watchdogs for World War I. And this is where the German Shepherd dog became most popular. So they, of course, saw a lot of service on the front lines, being used as watchdogs. They also became used as service animals for blind veterans. This was the Grand Duke of Oldenburg's kind of pet project, where they would take German Shepherd dogs and train them to be seeing eye dogs, basically. This is also where the Americans and the British first encountered the German Shepherd dogs in large numbers. They would, of course, capture these animals, and they would become enamored with their service on the front lines, and they imported them back into the United States and the UK. Following World War I, their popularity exploded. Partly this was due to the Weimar Republic and the monetary crisis that caused hyperinflation. The dog breeders at the time needed to sell large numbers of dogs in order to stay afloat, so they were selling their German Shepherd dogs off to Americans, off to the British, and to the Japanese. The Japanese were setting up their empire at this point, and at the beginning of 1930s is when they started invading Manchuria and setting up their Greater East Asian Prosperity Sphere, as they called it. This became a point of Japanese nationalism because 2 German Shepherd dogs actually died in service and became kind of public heroes to the Japanese military and to the Japanese public at large. So they became international kind of icons really quickly. The other thing that really helped with their popularity was the silver screen, the movie theater. This is when movie theaters became accessible to the public, and German Shepherds really started appearing on screen. The most famous dog actor of all time, Rin Tin Tin, actually, started off his film career at this point and became very popular for his feats of athleticism. He was a German Shepherd, and he would have been the recipient of the first Academy Award, the Oscar. However, it was overruled by the judges because they didn't want their awards show to turn into an animal awards show, and they wanted to make it humans only. But he won the Best Actor nomination, and he would have won the award itself, but they kind of overruled that. So the movies, imperialism, the war really helped expand their popularity. Their use in the military and the police was kind of an added bonus that gave them an air of authority and authenticity. You would think that World War II would do a lot to dampen these aspirations, but it didn't. So of course we know that the German dictator with the little mustache, he was obsessed with German Shepherds, and he had several in his life. Of course, we all know that he killed one of them because he was too cowardly to try the cyanide capsules on himself, and he fed it to his dog instead because he was an evil prick. I mean, I don't know what you want me to say. You know, the Germans did use German Shepherds in World War II, obviously, as did other powers as well. The Japanese, as we said, were using them. And they became popular in the UK and in the United States as well. So they became the dog of war, so to speak. And they became used by police around the world at this point in time too. Of course, we know them today for mostly their police dog activities, and that's where we typically associate them. And they have this role as this figure of state-authorized violence, state-authorized terror. I was going to do a whole section on this, but it needs its own video about police dogs, because police dogs, I mean, it's a ethical quandary and a half. I mean, you know, the people who are affected by it, the dogs themselves, and, you know, that kind of violence is very strange and very unique to be seeing in the 21st century. But that aside, they became popular in the military and the police and by the public at large for a variety of reasons. Now, getting back to the initial start of the breed, that emphasis on purity really meant that the dogs they selected for this wolf conformation carried a lot of heritable medical conditions, which affect them to this day. There's over 50 conditions in German Shepherds that are linked to heritability. I'm going to post the full list here, so have a good look at that. I'm not going to talk about all of them today because I don't have the time, and honestly, if you do want to know more about them, I'm willing to do follow-up videos or talk about those conditions, because it's not just German Shepherds that are affected by these, but multiple dog breeds because of the practices of keeping a small population pure, which usually involves inbreeding. Now, I had someone comment to my last, one of my previous videos about breeding. Line breeding is a form of inbreeding. It's just a very controlled form of it. It's breeding second and third cousins together rather than breeding brother or sister, you know, father, daughter, mother, son, kind of couplings, basically. And this breeding between distantly related individuals helps reduce the inbreeding coefficient, but it doesn't introduce new genetics. And this means that recessive traits stay in the population unless they are specifically targeted and eliminated from it. Now, there's no reliable genetic test for most of the breed-related conditions in German Shepherd dogs, which means they've stuck around since the inception of the breed at the beginning of the 20th century to this very day. I'm going to talk about three of them. So there's going to be the exocrine pancreatic insufficiency caused by pancreatic acinar atrophy, hip dysplasia, as well as clotting disorders. Exocrine pancreatic insufficiency is a condition where the pancreas, which does both hormones as well as digestive enzymes, is no longer able to produce digestive enzymes. So this can be due to a number of different causes. One of them, of course, would be heritable characteristics, and this is what we see in German Shepherds. They often lack the ability to digest certain foods, especially proteins and starches, and they can have very hard time digesting things. So they often see very voluminous, soft yellow stools. They often lose weight, and they're often ravenously hungry. This is pretty easily detected once it starts to show up with a blood test called the CTPLI test, basically. It is an expensive test. It's not like one we normally do on most blood screening tests, but it is something that we can detect. Treatment, of course, involves supplementing with enzymatic replacement, so enzymes that help replace some of the missing enzymes there. But a lot of owners can't afford that kind of medication, that kind of therapy, and it can, of course, cause great reduction in quality of life and eventually euthanasia in some cases. It is a heritable condition in the German Shepherds. They just never develop these pancreatic ducts normally, and they will pancreatic acinar cell groups, basically, and this can actually they haven't really found a test or a way to screen for it, so it is one of those conditions that we don't really know how to prevent it. We know it exists in the German Shepherd, and it's heritable. Another condition is hip dysplasia, and hip dysplasia is found in many different large dog breeds, but if you think about the hip here, the hip joint is basically the joint that holds the femur to the pelvis via the acetabulum. It's a ball and socket joint. With hip dysplasia, you get a flattened acetabulum, and the hip will just basically kind of slide in and out of there. This causes pain, lameness or limping, as well as eventually osteoarthritis or arthritic changes, basically. It is a developmental condition, so it often shows up around a year, 18 months, somewhere around then, a year to 18 months, somewhere around then. And it basically will progress throughout the course of the life. It is diagnosed easily with sedated x-rays, so you need to get them on their back and do kind of like try to pop the hips out of the joint and see if there's any movement there. Now, treatment for it is quite tricky though. Sometimes we could do total hip replacement on these guys, and fortunately for dogs, they only have a 15-year lifespan. Hips are really only good for 15 years, so hooray, huzzah. We only have to do one hip surgery on these guys for their entire life. However, not every owner can afford hip surgery for their animal. Most animal pet owners in the United States and Canada don't have pet insurance, so they're kind of stuck with just trying to treat palliatively, basically, or just pain control and management, or anti-arthritic medications like your meloxicam, Rimadyl, Deramax, that kind of thing, and trying to use those anti-inflammatory medications to help manage the condition. So, and also physical therapy. So this is one that we do know can actually be reduced by not breeding animals that have hip dysplasia and screening every animal for hip dysplasia before breeding them. But we don't know the exact genetic cause of it. It's probably polygenetic in German Shepherds, and there's multiple risk factors that go into it, not just genetics, but also diet and when they neuter them and all sorts of other things too, and exercise too. The final one I wanted to talk about was clotting disorders, because this one is strongly genetic, but we don't know exactly which genes cause it in German Shepherds. There's two major ones that we see in German Shepherds, hemophilia A and von Willebrand disorder, or disease. Hemophilia A is caused by an X-linked recessive gene mutation, which means that it only really affects XY males mostly, but the carriers are often XX females, you see. So this means that there will be these silent carriers that carry this defective gene, and they will pass it on to the male offspring. And those male offspring will develop a clotting disorder. This one can be tested pretty easily with a clotting disorder test and see if there's any increased elevations there. There's not really any good treatments for it. There's been some gene therapies proposed for it, but again, that's not something that most owners can really afford to do that way. Von Willebrand disorder or von Willebrand disease is another clotting disorder, and that one's associated with the von Willebrand factor. That's the one that causes the platelets to become activated to form the clot plug in the first place. Again, pretty easily to test. We do a buccal mucosal bleeding time test, where they cut the mucosa of the mouth and see how long it takes for the blood to clot, basically. Or the bleeding to stop, really. Again, we don't really have any good tests for this one, and unfortunately we don't routinely do these tests on animals, so we often find out the hard way that these animals have a clotting disorder when we go to spay or neuter them, basically. They will continue to bleed, and nothing that we can do helps stop the bleeding, other than, very strong compressions, tourniquets, leaving the clamps on for minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes, and hoping that eventually it'll clot. So unfortunately, animals have died because they've had these silent mutations that don't really show up very easily until we, of course, cut them open and try to remove their uterus or try to remove their testicles. So unfortunately, it's not one that we routinely test for. In German Shepherds, probably more likely that we would recommend testing for it before neutering or spaying them, but again, not required. We don't really know how to screen for it. They know how to do it in other dog breeds to use a very specific PCR test, but they don't really have that for German Shepherds. I want to emphasize that again, this is due to the small breeding population they had initially, the closed off genetics, the fact that this is a closed, pure breed. They're not breeding them with other dogs. If they bred it with other dogs, they would no longer be German Shepherds, definitionally. And the fact that, of course, this idea of purity is from the 19th century, and it does have its place in pseudoscience, and in fact, racist pseudoscience. That's not to say that I don't like German Shepherds. I think they're great dogs. I think they have a lot of purposes, and I think that they shouldn't be blamed for what their owners and what the breeders initially did to them and what they were looking for. But we have to be aware of these sort of things going forward, because this is an important aspect to breeds and dog breeding in general. That dog breeds originally came out due to biological racism, and that they are affected by health conditions because of that. And we need to move past that and to understand why we have these conditions in the first place if we're ever really going to learn from our past mistakes and try to be more responsible with how we treat our animals in the future. That's all I had for today. I hope it's not too controversial, and I hope you enjoyed. I hope this video is not too long. This will seem like a really long one. But if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the section below. Thank you for hanging around. Peace.